It's the dream of every fighter to one day be UFC champion. But while some fighters are immediately fast-tracked to success, others take a much longer journey to the top. Today, we take a look at the longest tenured fighters to claim MMA's biggest prize, and the setbacks each of them faced before finally claiming the belt. Welcome to the INC, and these are the 5 longest roads to UFC Gold. Number 5. Sha Strickland. Sha Strickland's rise was so improbable, we made an entire video about it. Check it out. Strickland made his UFC debut as a short-notice replacement against Bubba McDaniel, submitting his veteran opponent on the prelims of UFC 171. From there, Strickland enjoyed a steady, if unspectacular run in the welterweight midcard, before a knee injury from a motorbike crash forced him out of action for 2 years. When Strickland returned to action in 2020, he did so as a transformed fighter. A new weight class, fight style, and outspoken persona made him one of the breakout stars of the lockdown era. Strickland's willingness for a short-notice main event saw him earn a reputation as the UFC's company man. And when the top brass needed an opponent for middleweight champion Israel Adesanya, Tarzan was more than happy to answer the call. With a fighting style catered to Adesanya's counter-striking, Strickland entered the match in Australia as a 7-1 underdog. It took less than a round for the American to answer his naysayers. Strickland never looked back, using constant pressure to overwhelm Adesanya, who failed to find any momentum over the next 20 minutes. Strickland went on to claim a comfortable decision, and in doing so turned the outspoken Californian into one of the sport's breakout stars. Strickland's time on top, however, would be short-lived, losing his belt just 4 months later to Dricus du Plessis at UFC 297. One of the most unlikely title reigns of all time, also being one of the shortest. UFC 297 would be a pivotal night for another person on this list, but we'll get to their story later. Number 4. Michael Bisping. British grit is seen as a cliched stereotype, but with fighters like Michael Bisping around, it's easy to see why. Bisping made history in 2006 when he became one of the first British fighters to compete on the UFC's reality show, The Ultimate Fighter. Wins over Christian Rothermel and Ross Poynton earned the count a place in the final, where he went on to win the contest with a second-round stoppage of Josh Haynes. Bisping spent the next 9 years as a middleweight gatekeeper, often turning back rising prospects but unable to break through to the division's elite. Bisping suffered the indignity of coming up short in 3 successive title eliminators, before his career was nearly ended after a knockout loss to Vitor Belfort, which left him clinically blind in his right eye. It wasn't until 2016 that Bisping's fortunes finally turned, claiming the biggest win of his career against Anderson Silva before accepting a short-notice match against middleweight champion Luke Rockhold. Rockhold made comfortable work of Bisping when the two men first met years earlier, and with Bisping taking the bout on 10 days' notice, he was expected to make easy work of his veteran opponent. It was there that Bisping chose to leave his castle gates and take the crown for himself. Bisping's win is considered one of the biggest upsets in title history, as well as making the Manchester fighter the first Brit to ever win the UFC crown, 9 years and 11 months after making his company debut. Bisping defended his belt against old rival Dan Henderson in front of his own hometown crowd in Manchester, before winding down his career after a submission loss to George St. Pierre. His perseverance and status as a UK trailblazer earned him a spot in the UFC Hall of Fame in 2019. Number 3. Raquel Pennington. Raquel Pennington has long been considered one of the toughest fighters in women's MMA, and nothing showcases this better than her decade-long road to the title. Pennington first came to focus in 2013, when she was cast for the UFC first female season of The Ultimate Fighter. Pennington reached the semifinal before making her debut on the show's finale, claiming a decision win over MMA pioneer Roxanne Modafferi. In 2018, Pennington earned her first title shot against Amanda Nunes at UFC 224, a fight that ended in infamy when Pennington asked her corner to throw in the towel after sustained damage from her opponent. While Pennington rallied with a 5-fight winning streak, her workhorse style and the stigma of her title loss meant many refused to consider her a serious threat to the belt. But when Nunes chose to leave the sport in 2023, the UFC were forced to turn to Colorado's finest. At UFC 297, Pennington was booked for the vacant title against Mira Bueno Silva, who was fresh off a submission win over former champion Holly Holm. While the fight did little to excite the masses, Pennington and Silva tried to drum up interest during the pre-fight press conference.
I never finish what you want fight, because when you fight, I'm asleep, everybody sleep, don't sleep, everybody sleep.
So much time, but guess what? My fists are gonna do
You don't have a level. You don't
Keep
have a
talking.
UFC level.
Oh, I don't have it? All right, we'll see.
Silva started the fight strongly by scoring an early takedown and threatening several submission attempts, before Pennington's mix of clinch work and dirty boxing sapped the Brazilian's cardio come the end of the third round. Pennington dragged the fight into her domain in a one-sided final 2 rounds, and by the latter stages of the 5th, the once outspoken Brazilian had seemingly given up.
With a world championship on the line, hands behind head is about the worst visual you could ask for.
Pennington went on to claim a unanimous decision, and at 10 years, 1 month since her UFC debut, became the longest tenured female to win a UFC title. The fight also saw Pennington become the oldest woman to claim company gold, breaking the sport's infamous 35 curse in the process. Pennington is expected to make her first title defense later this year, where she looks to add to her portfolio by becoming the winningest fighter in women's bantamweight history. Number 2. Charles Oliveira. One of the joys of MMA fandom is seeing raw prospects realize their potential. For Charles Oliveira, this process took longer than most. Oliveira entered the UFC with much fanfare. By the age of 20, the Brazilian had amassed a 12-0 record with all of his wins coming in the distance, and added to the hype when he took 40 seconds to beat Darren Elkins at Fight Night San Diego. Oliveira spent the next 7 years in division limbo, making comfortable work of low-level opponents but falling short whenever he faced a jump in competition. His early tenure being marred by frequent weight misses and an inability to handle adversity. A move to lightweight in 2017 confirmed Oliveira's fortunes, winning 8 of his next 9 fights and developing a striking game to match his grappling prowess. It culminated at UFC 262 when Oliveira was booked against Michael Chandler for the vacant lightweight title. The fight was contested at a frantic pace, but it was Chandler who got the early advantage with a tight guillotine and rocking Oliveira with his trademark right hand. A young Oliveira would have been a sitting duck come the start of the second round. This 2021 incarnation, however, was a different beast.
Knocked out for Oliveira!
10 years and 9 months after the Elkins fight, Oliveira had finally reached the summit, silencing the critics of his early career and completing one of the sport's greatest turnarounds in the process. Oliveira vindicated his triumph with wins over Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje, further extending his record for the most finishes and submissions in UFC history. Oliveira last fought at UFC 300 in a losing effort to Arman Tsarukyan, and currently holds a record of 34 wins, 10 losses, and 1 no contest. Number 1. Robbie Lawler. Robbie Lawler is regarded as one of the most exciting champions in UFC history, but his road to even reach that point took him much longer than expected. Lawler made his debut as a brash 20-year-old against Aaron Riley at UFC 37, winning by unanimous decision and later starring in the UFC fight broadcast on cable TV. Dubbed the Mike Tyson of MMA, Lawler failed to live up to his early promise, suffering 3 successive stoppage losses and being released by the UFC in 2004, before a journeyman career with Pride, Strikeforce, and Elite XC. When Lawler returned to the UFC in 2013, he did so as a transformed fighter, combining the raw power of his early career with an increased maturity and fortitude. 3 straight wins saw Lawler earn a shot at the welterweight title, losing a close decision to Johnny Hendricks at UFC 171. Lawler, however, bounced back in style. A one-sided win over Jake Ellenberger was followed by a Fight of the Year candidate against Matt Brown. This led Lawler to a rematch with Hendricks at UFC 181, with the former Miletich man entering the fight as a 2-1 underdog. The fight played out similar to the first. Lawler's frenetic pace in the early stages was matched by the combinations and wrestling of Hendricks. The champion seemingly pulled out a small lead as the fight reached the final rounds. Knowing this fight would be his final shot at the belt, Lawler emptied the tank in the final round, rocking Hendricks with several big shots that left Big Rig clinging on come the final horn. The onslaught proved critical, as Lawler claimed 2 of the judges' scorecards and the welterweight title by split decision, 12 years and 6 months since first making his UFC bow.
New UFC welterweight champion of the world!
Lawler's fairy tale run continued in his next 2 fights. Showcasing his trademark resolve in battles with Rory MacDonald and Carlos Condit, the matches are considered 2 of the greatest in MMA history, with the former inducted to the UFC Hall of Fame in 2023. Lawler finally called time in his career after over 2 decades in the sport, his final bout with Nico Price proving a send-off worthy of his legend. And now time for a few honorable mentions. Fabricio Werdum was released by the UFC after a failed run in 2007, before returning to the fold 8 years later to claim the heavyweight title. Glover Teixeira entered a 9-year campaign by becoming the 2nd oldest champion in UFC history. 8 years after winning the Ultimate Fighter, Juliana Pena claimed bantamweight gold at UFC 269, and nearly broke Joe Rogan in the process.
Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk to you.
This is the INC. Please like, share, subscribe, post your feedback in the comments, and subscribe to Patreon for exclusive content.
Left in scenes while I was